the last video, the tower body had no textures. In this slow motion here, I turn on the textures as seen in the latest work that I've done. On the left side of the screen is the tower mesh and the placeholder textures that it had so far. On the right side, we can see the tower with a detailed sculpt, retopod geometry and some texturing on top. I had fun painting these WoW style textures, but there were struggles and lessons I learned in the process of making it. In this video, we'll go over all of that, so stick around to learn more about texturing visuals like these. Before we dive in, here is a quick overview of the chapters and the topics that we will cover in this video. We start with a quick overview of the preparation steps I took before texturing. From there, we move into the initial hand painting inside Substance Painter. We hop into Unreal 5 to preview one of the first drafts of the base materials. Seeing what works or needs tweaking, we go into changing the hues of the textures from warm to cold tones. From there, we get a reminder of the different art references I look at while I paint. We dive back into Painter where I tweak a new, visually richer tiling base material. Finally, we have a look at the end result. In the previous video, I hand painted the details of the floating spires of the tower. The next part to work on is the main body, the cylindrical shape. I sculpted it further, polished some parts and then started hand painting the textures for it, specifically the stonework visuals. Let's see a brief overview of the steps I took before hand painting the textures. There were preparations I needed to make. I don't want to skip them, but I won't focus on them in this video, so we can spend more time talking about the textures and the painting instead. If you want to see insights on how I sculpt and do quad drawing, retopology, watch the previous video in the series. In there, I spent less time talking about texturing and more time talking about the preparation steps beforehand, exactly the ones that we will quickly skim over in this video. So let's have this a speed run. I mean, this is game dev, so it kind of fits, right? My tower body was blocked out and previewed in Unreal. You can see the stage it was on here on the screen now as well. With the block out in a good state, I took its pieces I had made in Blender, I applied modifiers and triangulated and exported an FBX file to take into Zbrush. In Zbrush, I Z-remeshed and dynameshed the different pieces. Some I booleaned together in order to allow me to better sculpt and chisel their contact points, the spots where one piece clips into another. I decimate the few million points sculpt in Zbrush down to 1 or 200,000 points. I export that as an FBX file and I load it into Blender. From there, I hand quad draw a retopologized version of the sculpt, one that is game ready and has a sensible topology. I then finally UV map each piece. I used two texture sets, one for the tower main cylinder, the stone surfaces, a second one for the golden trims. That brings all pieces to a uniform texel density. Having two instead of one allows me for a richer detail when painting later on. I take the retopod UV mapped game ready low poly mesh into Painter. There, on top of it, I bake the high poly dense Zbrush sculpt, the decimated version of it. I begin my work by giving the golden trims a shiny gold material. The material is one that might be a bit too shiny, roughness is too dark, and too metallic for the actual WoW style, but it is work in progress and I'm okay with having it like this for now. Later on, I'll revisit both this gold on the tower body, but also the gold used on the floating spire. I'll pick roughness and metal values that are more appropriate. I will on top hand paint chipping and damage, seen like in the WoW game assets. For now though, we leave it to this. From there I go on to the tower main body, the stone surface. I copy the stone base material I made for my floating spires. That gives me the base albedo color that I use as a neutral value before on top I paint any dark regions or any highlights. With the neutral flat base material in, next I sketch some of the darks through the use of ambient occlusion mesh channels that I baked in the preparation steps. The AO is information of where parts of the mesh are in proximity to one another, creating a crevice, so to say, where light will have harder time reaching into. This info was extracted from the high poly, though if we really wanted, we could bake AO directly from the low poly mesh too, it just wouldn't be nearly as detailed. The AO is very useful because if I use the correct value of darkness and the correct amount of blur, instead of going overboard with a dense, sharp and textured noise, it will immediately give my mesh more depth. It will also get me a step closer to the wow stylized art visual that we are going for. I put in some AO now, but I know that later on I'll revisit it and tweak it further. I hand paint some details here and there, both darks and lights. My approach to painting in Substance Painter is to use my painting stylus. It's a Wacom Intuos Pro Medium 2014. It's probably the oldest tech I use in my everyday, the best investment I've had in the many past years. I try not to overwhelm myself with too many or too complicated brushes. The one I found myself liking the most is this one called Archive Inker, a Photoshop ABR brush, whatever that really means, I'm not too sure, which came by default in my version of Substance Painter 2023. I like this brush because it has rather hard edges. When I want to make larger highlights or larger damages, I press and go very aggressive, giving my brush strokes energy from a movement in my entire hand, from my elbow, instead of small movements that come from my wrist. With details painted at a level that I think is good for now, I go inside of Unreal 5, so I know what I'm making is working well. I want to preview it. This preview is not only the first time I see the new texturing, but also the first time I see the new geometry. The last time I had the tower body in the UE5 scene, I had only low poly pieces that clipped in one another, without any detail. Now I have the retopoled, much more intricate version placed in. I like how the light bounces off the structure, and I'm rather happy with my geometry. The texturing, however, could use some further work. At first, my stonework had warm tones, like those of sandstone. I believe that those didn't fit entirely well. They didn't exactly complement my gemstones and the rest of the colors in my scene. As such, I went back to Painter and I did a few levels and histogram adjustment layers. Through those, I knocked the overall color tint of my work away from warm tones and into cold tones. I also feel like the base color I use before applying darks or lights on top is a bit too light. As such, I do a histogram layer adjustment to a lower value. I believe that gives me a better base to work off of. The result is seen on the screen right now. Apart from warm and cold tones, I see what else needs tweaking. The moment I try out my work inside of Unreal, I learn valuable info of what to tweak and what values, be it lightness or saturation, might need improvements. The preview gives me lessons of what I can action immediately. These are the things I'm confident about thanks to experience and having been in situations like this before in art. But there are also problems I can see in the image, in the texturing, that I don't think I have the answers to immediately at hand. As such, this gives me a precious reminder to open my references, my mood board, and analyze the art I have there so I can be steered in the right direction. So I can be given the answers from the art of those who have figured it out before me. Here on the screen are my main references for the needs I have right now. First and foremost is the concept art from Ollie. I always look at this as my main testimonial as to what I'm trying to accomplish artistically. We mentioned this a few videos ago, but for those of you who might be new to this project, I made a 3D sketch of my tower back before I had done any Unreal 5 work on this artwork. I did that block out inside of Blender. On top, later on, Ollie painted and got me these ideas and visuals. You can see the progress from the block out I did to the art that he did right now. Next to the concept art from Ollie, I also go back into Azeroth and I take my flying shadow fiend for a trip. In game, I capture these morsels, these fragments showcasing things like a tiling based rock texture used uniformly as the first layer on the prop's texturing work. A hand-painted highlights and edge work, always bright and contrasting. A slim piece of ornate trim, I might need one like it in the upper parts of my tower. A piece of prop that has a gem or a lit up element of texturing. On top, a baked light sits. A trim of gold on a flat square plate and then on a triangular extruded loop around the mesh. A floor ornate gold chiseled trim pattern. A golden spike repeated twice, showing an intricate glossy edgework hand painting detail. I look at this and I see how Ollie and how artists on WoW solved their visual issues, and I then know how to continue the painting of my textures and improve my work thanks to these references. As such, this is your daily reminder: when doing art, make sure to look at plenty of references and learn as much as you can. It will only make your art stronger. By the way, I took the last 3 screenshots, the gold texture ones, whilst in the Forbidden Reach, where I spent weeks chasing achievements. If you're still grinding scrolls for the hidden treasures there, well, I wish you good luck. After revisiting my references and analyzing them, I got some ideas of how to improve my texturing. The first thought that I have is that my base material, the one that gives me the tiling detail on the stone surfaces, is rather lacking. I have one that is uniform sandstone and has a grain noise. It does not, however, have any cracks or large stone imperfections and tiling details. I don't want a base tile material that is overly contrasted in detail. I want something subtle that gives me ideas of where to hand paint different cracks and highlights. The one I currently have is very subtle, though, and it lacks any large tiling detail. That is why I decided to try and revamp and rework something better instead of what is there now. I could go into Substance Designer and create some base material of my own. That would take time though, and instead I'm thinking that there might be some existing Substance Painter tiling base material that, when used in a way that it's probably not supposed to be used, I might be able to pull off some interesting visuals. That was exactly the case. I took a PBR material that is made to be a realistic concrete. I scaled its UV tiling to be incredibly small. As such, the details of the textures are oversized on the mesh. I disabled the normals, the roughness, the height channels. Instead, I kept just the base color. The result was a slightly blurry but interesting patterns. With the right amount of tweaks, they looked stylized and as if some stone surface, not concrete or something modern and realistic. I liked where I was going with it, so I embraced it and I continued painting a lot of cracks, highlights and handmade details on top. I was using the concrete base as an inspiration to drive my brushstrokes. The result from the above is what we see on the screen right now. I tweaked the contrast here and there, as I was aiming for something rather dull. Stone surfaces that are not the main focal point, they don't need to scream to us with details and a lot of contrast. This is something that is seen in lots of zones in WoW, and I wanted to do well by it. This video is from the Apexis Mage Tower series, so expect a new one soon. We'll go over the golden trims, hand paint them, and then perhaps move to the crystals. It will be exciting. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed this. Remember to like and subscribe, drop any questions you have below. Cool, I need a break and I left my tea at the other side of the room and I'm all wired so I cannot actually get up. So no tea for me, it will have to go cold.